Ever get that feeling like, the world could use a good dose of strategy? Well, today we are going deep, really deep into a book that's all about strategy, the art of war.
By Sun Tzu.
Exactly. Sun Tzu, this ancient Chinese general, military strategist, philosopher, you name it. Now, I know, military strategy might not sound like a typical Tuesday podcast topic.
Unless every Tuesday is about outmaneuvering your opponents.
Touche, but seriously, what we're really talking about today is how to apply Sun Tzu's wisdom to, well, pretty much anything.
Because let's be real, there's a reason this book has been studied for centuries by leaders in all walks of life.
Absolutely. Business, politics, personal growth, you name it. So consider this your crash course in strategic thinking, Sun Tzu style. Are you ready to dive into the art of war?
Born ready, though hopefully we won't need any actual battle armor for this deep dive.
Definitely not required unless you want to wear it. But speaking of deep dives, let's start with the foundation, the bedrock of Sun Tzu's thinking, which he lays out as the five constant factors. Could you elaborate on those a bit for us? What are those five factors?
Right, so the five constant factors are essentially the elements that Sun Tzu believed were crucial in determining the outcome of any conflict. He said any ruler, or for our purposes, anyone who wants to achieve something significant, needs to really understand these factors.
Okay, so these factors apply to war, but also, like we were saying, to business, to personal challenges?
Absolutely. Any situation where there's a struggle, a goal you're trying to achieve, these factors are at play.
Got it. So hit us with factor number one. What's the first thing on Sun Tzu's list?
The first factor is moral law. And this one often throws people off because they think of it as some kind of ethical code, which it kind of is, but
It's deeper than that.
exactly. Sun Tzu is talking about the importance of unity, a shared purpose, that sense of everyone being on the same page and believing in the mission.
Okay, so like for an army, that would be the soldiers believing in their general, in the cause they're fighting for.
Exactly. And in a modern context, think about a company. If the team isn't aligned, if they don't believe in what they're doing, it doesn't matter how good the product is or the strategy, they're not going to succeed.
It's like that saying, a house divided cannot stand. You need that solid foundation of shared purpose. All right, that's moral law. What's next?
Factor number two is heaven. And this one, well, it's where some of the ancient Chinese philosophy comes in.
I was going to say, this one sounds a little, I don't know, mystical.
It does, but it's actually very practical. Sun Tzu is using heaven to talk about timing, about understanding the broader context of your actions, the seasons, the weather, the circumstances beyond your control, and how they influence what you're doing.
So like, don't launch a swimwear line in the middle of winter.
Precisely. Or, on a larger scale, don't start a war when the harvest is about to come in. Timing is everything.
It's about reading the room, seizing the right moment. Okay, 2 down, 3 to go. What's factor number 3 in Sun Tzu's strategic playbook?
The third factor is earth. And this one is a little more straightforward. It's about understanding your surroundings, the terrain, the physical environment you're operating in.
Okay, so in a literal battle, that makes sense. You want to know the lay of the land, where the hills are, the rivers, the potential ambush spots.
Yeah.
But what about in a more metaphorical sense? How does Earth apply to, say, a business deal?
That's a great question. In that context, earth might refer to the market conditions, the competitive landscape, the regulatory environment. It's about knowing the playing field and how the rules of the game work in that particular arena.
So it's about doing your homework, understanding the context, the external factors that might influence the outcome.
Okay, I'm starting to see the pattern here. So we've got the internal alignment with moral law, the timing aspect with heaven, the external landscape with earth. What's next? Next up is the commander, which focuses on, you guessed it, leadership. But it's not just about being a fearless warrior charging into battle.
Although I'm sure that doesn't hurt.
Of course, courage is important, but Sun Tzu emphasizes the qualities of wisdom, sincerity, benevolence, even love towards those you're leading.
So it's more about inspiring your troops, earning their respect and loyalty, than just commanding through fear.
Exactly. A good leader, according to Sun Tzu, cares about their people, understands their strengths and weaknesses, and knows how to bring out the best in them.
Okay, so we've got unity, timing, understanding the environment, and strong leadership. What's the fifth and final piece of this strategic puzzle?
The fifth factor is method and discipline. This one's all about the practicalities, organization, logistics, having clear procedures, and sticking to them.
Ah, so it's not enough to have a brilliant strategy. You need to be able to execute it flawlessly.
Exactly. You need
Yeah.
systems in place. You need to manage your resources carefully. This applies to everything from running an army to, well, running a business or even just managing your own life.
Method and discipline, the unsung heroes of success. All right, we've covered the five constant factors. This framework that Sun Tzu says is essential for navigating any kind of conflict. But let's be honest, one of the things people most associate with the art of war is the idea of deception.
And for good reason.
Because that's what makes it juicy, all the intrigue, the strategy, but it's also one of the most misunderstood aspects, isn't it?
It is, because when Sun Tzu talks about deception, he's not talking about being unethical or manipulative. He's talking about being strategic, about using surprise and misdirection to your advantage. It's about recognizing that every interaction has a strategic element.
So even something as simple as like asking for a raise at work has an element of strategy to it.
Absolutely. It's about understanding the power dynamics, the timing, the information each party has.
Okay, so back to the art of war. How does Sun Tzu say we can use deception effectively without being, shady?
Well, he gives examples like making your opponent think you're weak when you're actually strong,
Yeah.
or appearing to be miles away when you're right under their nose.
It's like that element of surprise, keeping your opponent guessing.
Exactly. And it's not about lying or being unethical. It's about using strategy and timing to your advantage.
So, in a business negotiation, for example, you wouldn't necessarily reveal all your cards right away.
Precisely. You want to hold back some information, some leverage, until the right moment.
It's about being smart, strategic, and maybe a little unpredictable.
Exactly. And that ties into another important concept from the art of war, efficiency. Sun Tzu understood that prolonged conflicts are costly.
Makes sense. Whether you're talking about a war, a business deal, or even just an argument with a friend,
Yeah.
the longer it drags on, the more resources you waste.
Precisely. And resources aren't just about money or supplies. It's also about time, energy, morale.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, have you ever gotten into a disagreement with someone and walked away feeling completely drained, even if you technically won the argument?
Exactly. That's why Sun Tzu stresses the importance of achieving your objectives as efficiently as possible.
So it's not just about winning, it's about winning smart.
Precisely. And that brings us to another one of Sun Tzu's most famous principles. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles.
Oh, that's a good one. But I feel like that quote gets thrown around a lot without people really understanding what it means.
It's easy to oversimplify it.
So break it down for us. What does Sun Tzu really mean by know yourself and know your enemy?
It's about self-awareness and observation, knowing your own strengths and weaknesses, as well as those of your opponent.
So like in a job interview, for example, you'd want to be aware of your own skills and experience, but also research the company and the role you're applying for.
Exactly. You need to understand what you bring to the table and what they're looking for.
And also maybe what your competition might look like.
Precisely. It's about gathering as much information as possible to make informed decisions.
So know yourself and know your enemy is basically Sun Tzu's way of saying, do your homework.
In a nutshell, yes. But it's also about being honest with yourself about your own abilities and limitations.
That's a good point. Because sometimes we can be our own worst enemies, right?
Absolutely. And that self-awareness is crucial for adaptability, which is another key theme in the art of war.
Oh, right. Somebody talks about being like water flowing around obstacles.
Precisely. He understood that no plan survives contact with the enemy.
Or, with reality in general, things change, unexpected things happen, and you need to be able to adapt.
Exactly. And that adaptability requires a deep understanding of yourself and the situation you're in.
So it's about being flexible, being open to new information, and being willing to change course if necessary.
Precisely. It's about being fluid, like water, adapting to the shape of the container.
Which in this case might be a rapidly changing market, a difficult negotiation, or even just a personal challenge.
Exactly. And speaking of gathering information and adapting to changing circumstances, that leads us to another fascinating aspect of Sun Tzu's teachings, the role of spies and intelligence gathering.
Ooh, yes. This is where the art of war gets really interesting.
It's definitely one of the most intriguing and often misunderstood aspects of the book.
Because when most people think of spies, they think of like James Bond or something.
Right, cloak and dagger operations, secret missions.
That Sun Tzu's concept of spying is much broader than that, isn't it? It's more about being strategic with information gathering, right?
Exactly. Sun Tzu identified 5 types of spies, local, inward converted, doomed, and surviving, each serving a specific purpose in gathering intelligence.
5 types of spy. Okay, see, this is what I mean about going deep. I mean, that's a whole other podcast episode right there, just unpacking those different types.
It definitely could be. And maybe we'll have to circle back to that another time. But for now, I think the key takeaway is that Sun Tzu recognized the importance of gathering information from all available sources.
So it's not just about having spies in the traditional sense. It's about being observant, paying attention to your surroundings, talking to people, asking questions.
Exactly. It's about being curious and always looking for an information edge.
Because in any kind of competition, whether it's business or politics or even just trying to get that promotion at work, information is power.
Absolutely. The more you know about your opponent, about the market, about the situation you're in, the better equipped you are to make strategic decisions.
It's about reducing uncertainty, minimizing risk, and making the most informed choices possible.
Precisely. And that brings us to another point I think is important to emphasize. Sun Tzu wasn't all about cold, hard strategy. He also understood the importance of compassion and respect, especially when it comes to leadership.
That's interesting because you wouldn't necessarily expect a military strategist to be talking about compassion.
You might not. But Sun Tzu recognized that true strength comes from unity, from having a shared purpose, and from treating your followers with respect and care.
There's that famous quote from The Art of War where he says, "Regard your soldiers as your children, and they will follow you into the deepest valleys."
Exactly. It's about inspiring loyalty and dedication, not through fear or intimidation, but through genuine care and concern.
Which I guess ultimately goes back to that first constant factor we talked about, moral law, that foundation of trust and shared purpose.
Precisely. It all ties together.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground today. It's amazing how relevant Sun Tzu's writing still is, even though he was writing about warfare in ancient China.
It really is a testament to his understanding of human nature and the timeless principles of strategy.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the art of war, what's one key takeaway you hope our listeners will walk away with?
If I had to choose just one, I think it would be the importance of always thinking strategically about every aspect of our lives.
I love that. He's
Yeah, that's right.
strategizing.
Well, maybe not always. But Sun Tzu encourages us to be observant, to consider multiple perspectives, to be adaptable, and above all, to never stop learning.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive. A huge thank you to our expert for guiding us through the intricacies of the art of war.
It was my pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey through ancient wisdom for modern times. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the ideas that shape our world.